Excellency, thank you for giving time for the interview. I would like to start with the visit of State Consular to United States earlier this month. So what do you view about the visit and what were achieved out of the visit for the bilateral relationship?
Right. Well, it was a really important visit. Of course, from our perspective, President Obama has paid a lot of attention to Myanmar. He's tried to make sure that the United States has played a helpful role by supporting the reform process going back now several years. And this visit, of course, was important because it was the first visit of the State Counselor of Aung San Suu Kyi in her new role as an elected leader. So it was an opportunity to look back at what all the change that's happened, but also talk about how the United States could work going forward to continue to support the reform process, the democratic transition, the peace process, all of these things. And so what the two leaders really highlighted was, first, they announced a new U.S.-Myanmar partnership, which reflects the fact that our relationship is really normalized, that we're now working together in a lot of areas, both to support Myanmar's own agenda, but to see where we can work together in the region and globally on issues. So that was important. Of course, President Obama announced that we would be offering GSP benefits to Myanmar. That's a way to help promote the economy, to help create jobs here. And he announced that after careful consultation, we would be lifting the economic sanctions. And that was a decision made specifically because he decided that the best way to help the democratic transition, to help further reform, was to lift the sanctions, which were having a negative impact on the overall economy. So we thought lifting the sanctions was the best way going forward to help the reform process continue.
Can you tell us more insight into the details and time frame of the sanctions? For example, how about those who are currently under the targeted sanction list? Are they going to be dropped, or what are the names, or what are the details, and what is the time frame about the sanctions dropping?
Sure. So the president's decision is to lift to end the Burma sanctions program, which really was targeted sanctions, as you mentioned, against some individuals and some companies that had been subject to targeted sanctions in recent years, the so-called specially designated nationals list. There were a little bit over 100 names on that list, both individuals and companies. So the White House will soon issue an executive order that will end that program. It should happen in a matter of days or maybe a week or two. It will be done. And that will mean that those people and those companies are no longer facing U.S. sanctions. There will be no U.S. sanctions, economic sanctions against any companies or individuals in Myanmar.
You mentioned about Myanmar and also economy. How this dropping of U.S. sanctions will affect Myanmar or Myanmar's economy?
Right. Well, what we saw, particularly after we eased sanctions this past May, was that even though our sanctions were supposed to be very targeted, and they were technically very targeted, the impact they were having was broader and much more negative than what we wanted. And what I mean by that is that a lot of good international companies, not only U.S., but other Western companies, they would look and they would see that there were still U.S. sanctions applied against Myanmar. And even though those sanctions might have been very narrowly focused, for a lot of companies, it raised the risk of doing business here. It just wasn't worth it for them to do business here because they didn't want to get caught up in any sanctions. And so what we saw was that the sanctions were actually discouraging both good investment, but also for the financial transactions that are so essential for the health of this economy. And at the same time, for this new government to succeed, it needs to be able to show that it can deliver the jobs and increase prosperity for people. So we didn't want our sanctions to be making it harder for the new government to succeed. And that's really what the lifting of sanctions is all about.
Is it also a sort of a signal, big signal for the American companies to come and invest in Myanmar?
Well, certainly that's I think one of the impacts that we hope to see. We would like to see more U.S. companies investing here. We think there's good opportunities, and we think that American companies coming in and investing with high standards, good corporate governance, hiring and training local people, following all the laws of the country, can contribute quite a bit to Myanmar's economic development and to the government's efforts to make sure that there's good broad-based growth that protects the environment, protects workers' rights, and creates jobs and prosperity.
I'd like to touch the issue of military-to-military relation between the two countries. What is the current stage of military-to-military relations, especially with the Myanmar Armed Forces?
Right. We have some limited engagement between our two militaries. In fact, we had the deputy commander of the U.S. Pacific Command was here earlier this week, and he met the deputy commander-in-chief, General So Win, earlier this week. Basically, there are a lot of things we're still not doing between the two militaries. There's certainly no arms sales. There's no joint exercises happening or any kind of traditional military training. But we are doing some engagement to share the example of the U.S. military as a military that's under civilian control and that tries to be the most professional, responsible military it can be. So we're doing some programming, some education work with the Top Mada as a way of, again, trying to highlight the U.S. model and we hope encourage continued reform within the Myanmar military. But overall, I would say it's the one part of the relationship that's still quite limited.
Is it the same program that I hear just a few days ago about this U.S. support for civic-military relationship in Myanmar?
Yeah. As you know, our military, which we're quite proud of, is a professional military that is under full civilian control. It reports to civilian leadership. Of course, the people of Myanmar have to decide their own future, but we think talking to the military and others about how civilian control of the military works, about how you can develop a very professional, respected military that is under civilian control, is something that's useful for us to do. So General Crutchfield, the Deputy Pacific Commander, met with General So Win, as I mentioned. He also spoke to officers at the National Defense College. He also met with ethnic groups and civil society because we want to be very transparent about what our military-to-military relationship is, make sure everybody knows what we're doing, but also what we're not doing.
Yeah. I just would like to sort of reconfirm about United States position on Myanmar when it comes to military's role in politics in the country. So whatever you are doing, are you going to have a second thoughts on, for example, 2008 Constitution, for example, on the issue of militaries, parliamentarians in the parliament?
Well, our position is that in a democracy, the people of Myanmar should be able to decide these issues. It's not for the United States to say, do this or do that, but the people of Myanmar in democracy should be able to decide these things, you know, what kind of constitution they want, if they want to make changes to the constitution, and the appropriate role for the military. But generally, as President Obama has said in the past during his visits, we think that there are parts of the Constitution that don't reflect a full democracy. I think many other people have said that. Again, we want to leave it to the people of Myanmar to decide how they want to proceed, but we would like to see Myanmar continue to move toward a full democracy in which there is civilian control of the military.
I'd like to just go back to the investment issue. In your opinion, what Myanmar side needs to do to get foreign investors and companies easier to invest in Myanmar?
Sure. Well, I think these days in the world, whether it's the Myanmar economy or the U.S. economy, foreign investment is critical. I don't think any country these days can prosper without being part of the international economy, and that means being open to trade and investment. So that's very important. First, I would say that the parliament just passed the investment law, which I think was a very important step that I hope will encourage more investors. There's other work to do, I think, as the government has recognized, improving the infrastructure, including making sure there's adequate electricity, power. continuing to work on rule of law, streamlining the bureaucratic procedures to make it easier to invest. But I think also working with the public and with foreign investors to show the people of Myanmar that foreign investors can really contribute. Because I know there are people in this country who understandably are concerned about foreign investors. They want to make sure that those foreign investments are going to really help. And that's fair. I'm very confident that American investors coming in will be, as I said, following the laws and hiring local people and training them and becoming parts of the local community and contributing to Myanmar. So I think there's a lot of work to do to win that broad support within the public for foreign investment.
Overall, how do you see the US-Myanmar relations changing under the Nationally for Democracy government in Myanmar?
Well, the relationship has improved greatly over the last 5 years in response to the reforms that have taken place here. With the elections last November and the transition to the new elected government in March, that's made it easier for us to grow even closer. So the relationship's very good. It's expanding. We're working together in more areas, including how do we work together to promote education and health. How do we deal with the narcotics problem, which affects both of our countries quite a bit? Is there more we can do on law enforcement? But also on regional and international issues, whether it's climate change or transnational crime, threats to things that threaten the region and both of our countries. I think there's huge opportunities out there, and that's really what the partnership that the President and State Councilor announced is supposed to address. It creates a mechanism for us to work together in all these areas. So short answer, the relations are very, very good, very open and improving.
Is North Korea still a thorny issue in the bilateral relation as it was?
What I would say is that North Korea's actions are raising a lot of concern around the world, in the region, and in the United States. I wouldn't describe it as a thorny issue between our two countries. It's an area where we talk and try to figure out how we can work together to address a country that is very concerning for all of us.
How about Myanmar's, what do you think of Myanmar's democratization process? What do you think of the current stage of the process, especially after the 2015 November elections?
Well, I think it's come a long way. There's no question. I started visiting your country in 2005, and when I look at the situation now compared to then, there's no comparison. Dramatic progress. Obviously, you had elections. You have now an elected government. An elected parliament, at least 75% of the seats filled by elected parliamentarians. You have much greater freedom of press, of course you know that, and movement on rule of law, release of political prisoners. So there's been great accomplishments. I think everybody recognizes there's more work to do. And as a country that's been a democracy for more than 200 years, we recognize you never stop. We also have to work to continue to strengthen our democracy. So I think, and I know that the government is working to try to improve rule of law, still to address some of the old laws that have been used that might not be appropriate for a new democratic society. There's still work to do, obviously, in the peace process. And I think part of building this democracy is building a federal democracy in which all of the people of the country feel that their rights are protected, that they enjoy the same rights. And the government's obviously trying to do this. It's not an easy task. So you can look and see there's plenty of work to do, but I think that doesn't change the fact that there's been really remarkable progress here. And I think the people of Myanmar should be proud of that.
We have peace process going on for about some years, and we have fightings, you know, the quite severe fightings in the north these days. What do you think of this?
Well, I think we've always supported the peace process. You know, no country can be successful if there's ongoing fighting. And you all know the history of that here much better than I do, but many years of conflict and tensions. And so we strongly support the peace process. We've told the government and the ethnic armed groups that if there's things we can do to help, we will certainly try to be helpful. I think the recent conference, the 21st Century Panelon Conference, was an important step, but much more work needs to be done. We are very concerned about the fighting in Cayenne State, in northern Shan State, in Kachin State. I was in Kachin State a week ago. There seems to be increased fighting there. People are very concerned. There are a lot of internally displaced people, more than 80,000, is the figure I've been told. And there are restrictions on humanitarian access to them, which is troubling. So again, it's not for us to point any fingers, but clearly this increased fighting is making it harder to achieve peace. And it's also, of course, affecting people, citizens of this country, in a very problematic way. So we've expressed hope, and we've issued a statement expressing hope that those involved in the fighting will work hard to step back from that fighting, to reduce the fighting, and to ensure there's humanitarian access for any displaced people so that the peace process can continue.
Besides these continued fightings, what, in your opinion, what are the major areas of challenges for Myanmar's democratic transition?
Well, you know, the peace process going forward, not only to reach a ceasefire, but obviously to have this political dialogue to work out the type of federal union that you want to have. That's going to take time. That's hugely important. I think dealing with some of the communal conflict within the country is also an issue. It's been particularly noticed, of course, in Rakhine State, but there's some challenges in other places. So I think continued work on that. I think building the institutions, whether it's you know, strengthening parliament, including regional and state parliaments, rebuilding the education and health sectors. These things will take time, but they're all very important. And I think, obviously, fundamental development, creating more jobs, trying to build an economy that is very inclusive, that creates a lot of opportunities for people throughout the country. Again, all of these things are going to take time, but they're very necessary. I think the government recognizes these, is working very hard, as is civil society and many others. So plenty of challenges, but I think a lot of positive momentum. And I see a lot of people in the government and outside of the government who see opportunities and are working very hard to try to build a stronger country.
Last question from me. People in Myanmar are quite closely watching the US elections in November. What do you think, is there any possibility of policy change from United States on Myanmar if there is a change of government in United States?
Yeah, well, one way or the other, we'll certainly have a new president and a new administration. And what I would say is it's hard to predict with certainty all the details of the foreign policy of any incoming president. But what I would say is, and I was just in Washington a few weeks ago during the state councilor's visit and had a chance to talk to many members of Congress from both parties. What I would say is there's strong support in both parties for doing all we can to continue to be a good friend and partner to the people of Myanmar. And that means strong support for continuing to do all we can to support Myanmar's reform and democratic transition. So again, I wouldn't want to try to predict all the details, but I'm quite confident there will be continued strong support for what the people of Myanmar are trying to do in this country.
Is there anything else you would like to add for our audience and readers?
I would just say, as an American, not even as the ambassador, just as an American, we really admire what the people of this country have accomplished. And we know it's very easy for people sometimes to get discouraged because there's still so many challenges. But when we look around the world, we see this place as a place that's achieved a lot and has the opportunity to continue to make great progress. And we're going to be a good friend and do everything we can to support.
Thank you, Excellency, for your support to democracy and also for giving this interview.
Thank you.